You never truly know someone until you walk away. That moment when you finally step back, when your silence replaces arguments, when you stop chasing, that's when masks start to slip. What you thought was love, loyalty, or even decency reveals its true face, and it's rarely the one you hope for. This is not just a lesson in relationships. It's a brutal, soul-awakening unveiling of human nature. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And sometimes, the way they treat you when you withdraw is their subconscious soul screaming louder than their words ever could. At first, they may not notice. The silence seems temporary. Your absence feels like a phase. They might assume you're sulking, waiting for an apology, craving attention. But the real shift begins when you don't return, not with a message, not with a smile, not even with resentment. You vanish, not from the world, but from their narrative. And suddenly, they're uncomfortable, because now they don't have control. They can't predict your next move. They can no longer use guilt, flattery, or gaslighting to pull you back into orbit. Your detachment becomes their trigger. Your silence. It's deafening to them. That's when the storm begins. The ones who once claimed to care might lash out. Words filled with venom. Accusations wrapped in false concern. Or complete disregard dressed as indifference. Others might become strangely charming, promising change with syrupy tones and hollow eyes. But pay attention. Not to what they say, but to what they didn't say when you needed them. Not to how they beg now, but how they blamed you before. Because when you walked away, you stopped being their mirror. You stopped being their emotional punching bag, or the one they could manipulate with a glance. You became unfamiliar, an independent force that didn't orbit around their needs. And that scares them. People reveal their truest colors, not in moments of celebration, but in moments of loss. When you remove your presence, the energy they fed on, the attention they demanded, the forgiveness they always expected, they either reflect or retaliate. Few reflect, most retaliate. This is the painful beauty of distance. It cleans the glass you were looking through. It washes away the fog of wishful thinking, the dirt of repeated disappointments, and the fingerprints of emotional fingerprints left by people who were never really holding your hand. They were holding you down. And suddenly, you remember moments that didn't sit right, the comments that felt like tiny cuts, the laughter that didn't sound warm, the apologies that never arrived. Distance doesn't just show you who they are. It reminds you who you've always been. It brings back the version of you that didn't second-guess every feeling. The you who laughed louder, slept easier, and didn't carry conversations in your head long after they ended. The you before guilt became your compass and confusion your baseline. That's the thing about walking away. It's not just about leaving someone else. It's about returning to yourself. And the journey back is never as glamorous as movies make it seem. It's messy, it's lonely, it's filled with doubt, but it is real, and it's yours. They may tell others you were unstable, dramatic, too sensitive. Let them, because people often villainize what they can't control. You are not responsible for the version of you they invent in their stories. You're responsible for the version of you that survived. And this version, it doesn't need validation from people who watched you drown and asked why you weren't swimming harder. This version remembers the nights you stayed up defending yourself in your mind, the hours you replayed arguments hoping to fix them in hindsight, the tears you wiped before anyone noticed. Now you don't owe them closure. You don't owe them softness. You owe yourself peace. Let them misunderstand. Let them twist the narrative. You've spent too long trying to be heard in rooms where your voice was only tolerated, not valued. Your silence now speaks louder than your explanations ever could. And if they truly cared, they would have listened before you had to walk away. People often wonder, why didn't I see it sooner? Why did I stay, explain, forgive, over and over again? The truth is, when we love someone, we don't see them as they are. We see them as we hope they could be. And that hope, that illusion, is more powerful than any red flag waving in front of us. You believe their silence was just stress, their coldness, a rough day, their withdrawal. Maybe they needed space. You filled in the blanks with compassion, painted over absence with understanding, and called it love. But what you were really doing was making excuses for mistreatment, dressing it up in empathy so you wouldn't have to confront the truth. They didn't value you the way you valued them. It's hard to accept that someone you fought for never fought for you. That while you were losing sleep, thinking about how to fix things, they were sleeping soundly, untouched by the chaos they left behind. You poured yourself into conversations trying to make things right, but they had already decided you were the problem. And yet, even with all this, you stayed. Because leaving felt like failure. Because you thought if you just loved them harder, they'd finally see your worth. But that's not how it works. Love doesn't cure indifference. Kindness doesn't awaken the emotionally unavailable. And your empathy can't fix someone who enjoys being broken, especially when their brokenness gives them power. What you were calling love was a test of endurance. And no one wins in those kinds of relationships. You lose time, self-worth, and sometimes your identity. You start shrinking, making yourself small so they feel bigger. You start doubting yourself, editing your emotions, walking on emotional glass just to avoid setting them off. You learn to say, it's fine when it's not. You learn to stay quiet just to keep the peace. But peace built on silence is not peace. It's control. And it was never just about one argument, one betrayal, one cold night. It was a pattern, a slow erosion of your boundaries, a constant gaslight that made you question your perception, your needs, your reality. They didn't need to raise their voice to hurt you. Sometimes it was the quiet neglect that screamed the loudest, the shrug when you cried, the eye roll when you shared your dreams, the way they always needed understanding but never gave it in return. Eventually something breaks, and not in the dramatic movie scene kind of way. No screaming, no final blowout, just a quiet, hollow moment of clarity. You realize they're never going to change. You realize staying is more painful than leaving.
If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.
You realize that loving them is costing you, so you detach. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. You stop replying so quickly. You stop defending yourself. You stop needing them to see your point of view. You let them be right if that's what they need. You let them believe the story where you're the villain, because you've learned that sometimes self-respect looks like being misunderstood. And in that detachment, you start seeing everything clearly. How many times you begged for the bare minimum. How often you forgave without an apology. How many pieces of yourself you handed over hoping they'd finally feel whole. But they didn't want healing. They wanted control. And now that they can't control you, they'll claim you're difficult, disloyal, distant. But distance is what saved you. Space is what gave you perspective. And silence? It became your loudest answer. The version of you that needed to be needed. That version is gone. Now, you're reclaiming your voice. Not to argue, not to prove, but to speak truths to yourself that were buried under years of compromise. You're remembering who you were before them. The one who didn't second-guess every emotion. The one who laughed without waiting for approval. The one who believed that love didn't have to feel like sacrifice. This version of you doesn't chase. It doesn't beg. It doesn't explain itself in hopes of being accepted. It simply exists, confidently, unapologetically, and fully. And if that makes you too much for some people, then they were never enough for you. Let them say you changed. Let them wonder what happened. Let them gossip, judge, misunderstand. That's none of your business. Because, for the first time in a long time, you're not fighting to be seen by others. You're learning to see yourself. And that's where real freedom begins. You don't just wake up one morning healed. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't shout, "Look at me now!" It's quieter than that. It looks like texting less, breathing more, eating on time, and laughing again. Without checking who's watching, healing slips in like sunrise. Soft, gradual, impossible to notice until suddenly the room is full of light. And yet, the shadows don't fully disappear. They linger, especially in the quiet moments. You'll still hear their voice when a song plays. You'll still instinctively reach for your phone when something good happens, only to remember they're no longer the person you want to tell. That's grief. Not just the loss of them, but the loss of the version of yourself that once believed you needed their love to feel whole. But now, you're learning to love yourself without needing permission. You start setting boundaries. At first, they feel like walls, cold and isolating, but eventually, you see their doors with locks that you hold the keys to. You decide who gets access. You decide what you tolerate. And when someone tries to guilt you for doing so, you smile, not to appease, but because now you understand. Their discomfort is not your burden. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop breaking your own heart to make others comfortable. You stop watering dead plants, because love shouldn't feel like labor. And if someone only grows when you're shrinking, it's not growth, it's dependence. Sometimes people notice the shift and try to pull you back into your old role. The forgiver, the fixer, the quiet one who never asks for much. They test your silence, your kindness, your empathy. But you've outgrown the need to be liked at the cost of being respected. And now you choose self-worth over survival mode. You realize peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of alignment. It's walking away when something breaks your soul, even if it makes sense on paper. It's choosing the hard conversation over the fake smile. It's choosing loneliness over settling. Because being alone with yourself is better than being in a relationship that makes you feel alone with someone. You start noticing red flags you used to color over with hope. You see how manipulation hides behind charm. How passive aggression disguises itself as jokes. How inconsistency is not confusion, it's communication. When someone shows you they don't care, you stop arguing with the message. You stop romanticizing potential. You stop editing your intuition to fit someone else's version of the story. And you finally understand, love is not a battlefield. You don't win by enduring more pain. You win by walking away when your heart is no longer heard. You start surrounding yourself with people who don't require translation, who understand your silence, honor your vulnerability, and respect your no. People who show up not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. You stop craving intensity and start craving consistency. Peace no longer feels boring. It feels safe, and safety becomes the standard. Eventually, your past becomes a place of reference, not residence. You can revisit it without reliving it. You can talk about it without crying. You can thank it for the lessons without wishing it had been different. Because now you see, it broke you. Yes, but it also built you. You're not hard to love. You were just asking for love from someone who didn't know how to give it. You're not too sensitive. You just felt everything in a world that taught you to numb. You're not overthinking. You were undervalued. And now, you're rising. Not in a grand cinematic way, but in the quiet decision to not text back. In the steady return to your hobbies. In the boundaries you reinforce with grace. In the truth you no longer bend. In the soft smile you give yourself in the mirror because you survived what tried to erase you. Healing is not about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone wiser, softer, stronger. Someone who holds their pain with compassion instead of shame. Someone who no longer seeks validation in empty places. Someone who knows, not every goodbye is a loss. Some are invitations to meet yourself again. And this version of you? She's not broken. She's blooming. There comes a stillness after the storm. A moment when you finally walked away, not out of anger, not in some dramatic escape, but in the quiet realization that staying was slowly erasing you. That's the kind of clarity that doesn't arrive with fireworks, but with an exhale so deep it feels like the first breath you've taken in years. At first, the silence feels foreign. You miss the noise, even if it was chaos. The tension that once coiled in every corner of your body now leaves space behind, and you don't quite know how to live inside that space yet. It's like walking into a house that was once full of shouting and now only echoes with your footsteps. Peace can feel like absence at first, until you realize that absence is the beginning of freedom. Slowly, the changes arrive. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. Your nervous system, once tuned to someone else's emotional weather, begins to recalibrate. You're not scanning for mood shifts or waiting for the next passive-aggressive jab. Your mornings no longer start with anxiety. Your nights aren't ending in emotional audits. The world becomes less like a battlefield and more like a field, open, still, waiting for you to run. And then it hits you. You didn't just leave a person or a relationship. You left a system, a machine powered by your compliance, your silence, your willingness to contort. Every time you said, "It's fine," when it wasn't, Every time you apologized just to keep the peace. Every time you absorbed blame that wasn't yours, you fed the engine. And now that you've stepped away, the machine sputters. It can't run without your fuel. This is where the real battle begins. Not with them, but with the ghosts they left behind in you. Guilt comes dressed in nostalgia. It whispers in voices you trusted. You gave up too soon. You're too sensitive. They didn't mean it that way. And maybe the cruelest of all, you'll never find better. These are not truths, they are echoes. Echoes of people who benefited from your shrinking, not your thriving. But something stronger than guilt starts to take root. Self-respect, not the flashy kind that posts affirmations online, but the kind that shows up quietly. It looks like saying no without explanation. Like deleting a message you know you don't need to send. Like choosing solitude over familiar dysfunction. It's not always glamorous. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it feels like failure, but it's not. It's a reclamation. And as you reclaim your time, your mind, your joy, you start to notice how much of your life was spent performing. You weren't just a partner or a friend. You were an emotional contortionist, bending into whatever shape someone else needed to feel powerful. Now, you're learning to be still, to be whole, to be unyielding in your boundaries and soft in your heart, because the two can exist together. You stop justifying your growth. You stop translating your needs into palatable language. You stop dressing your truth in apologies. And those who can't handle this version of you, let them go. Your evolution is not a betrayal. It is the most honest thing you've ever done. You'll begin to notice who stays. The ones who never needed you to shrink. The ones who clap for your boundaries instead of seeing them as walls. These are your people. The ones who don't require your suffering to feel safe. Who don't equate silence with love. Who don't call your clarity a threat. And as for the ones you left behind, something interesting happens. They reveal themselves. Some will lash out, accuse, spin stories. Others will act like nothing happened, hoping you'll fall back into rhythm. But a few, just a few, might finally face their own shadows, if only because your absence forced them to look. That, however, is not your concern. You are no longer in the business of managing other people's discomfort. You've graduated from that role. Your only job now is to stay true to the self who walked away. The self who decided that peace is not too much to ask for, that being loved shouldn't require self-abandonment, that healing is not selfish. There will be hard days. Days when you question everything. Days when the loneliness feels heavier than the pain you left. But those days are part of the process. They are not signs you are wrong. They are signs you are growing. Think of them as withdrawal symptoms from a life of emotional overfunctioning. Eventually, even the hard days soften. You wake up one morning and realize you're no longer flinching at old triggers. You stop translating silence into rejection. You stop needing everyone to understand your path because you finally do. That's the moment you know. You didn't just walk away from something toxic, you walked towards something sacred, yourself. And that is the most radical act of all.